Welcome to Mass Culture's MC Minds, where we delve deeper into the intelligence of Canadian thought leaders in the arts. My name is Katherine Carleton. Today, listen to part 2 of Glodeane Brown's interview, in which she chats to 3 executive directors of 3 arts service organizations. Diane Davy is the ED of WorkInCulture, Katherine Carleton of Orchestras Canada, and Susan Nagy of Lakeshore Arts. If you haven't checked out part 1, be sure to do so now. The conversations in this two-parter explore the executive director's longevity in the arts sector and acts as an entry point to a research project Mass Culture is working on in partnership with Ryerson University, funded by SSHRC, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. The project is entitled Mapping Canadian Arts Service Organizations as Cultural Research Conduits. The survey will be available for completion from September 12th, 2019 until October 24th.
I was going to ask, how do you think arts service organizations can most effectively partner with each other to enrich their members and also the arts scene as a whole? You kind of touched on that with Lakeshore Arts. Did Diane or Katherine want to weigh in on that at all?
I'm back to my Venn diagram. There is so much overlap in terms of the kind of work that we've been doing. Shortly after I arrived at Orchestras Canada, I'm going to say it was about 2006, I was really impressed with the way of being in the world of a number of my colleagues, particularly on the performing arts side of things. And so these were leaders of other performing arts service organizations, and we realized that we really liked one another's ways of working and that we could learn from one another. We got some, I think it was flying squad money from the Canada Council to embark on a study of what some of our opportunities for collaboration might potentially be. Some of this too was really inspired by a groundbreaking study from the Boston Foundation on the potential for collaboration between arts service organizations in the Boston area. I do want to put in a bit of a note that I think arts service organizations and their potential and their impact are among the least studied things ever. And so we all sort of seized on this Boston Foundation report. And essentially the suggestion was that micro-organizations, as we all were and are, can only be limited in their impact, that it's only through collaboration that we can start to have the kind of impact that we're really looking for. So we went into this collaboration with the idea that we're going to find something massive, huge, things that would absolutely transform the universe as we knew it, and we were going to do 5, 10, 15 giant collaborations that would just change everything. And then our consultant that we'd engaged through this process began to take a look at some of the collaborations in other parts of the arts service organization world, in the US and in Europe. And one of the things that became abundantly plain was that collaboration on the kind of scale that we had fantasized about was quite simply not in the cards in the short term in particular, that they required additional investment in order to ensure that we had the time to build the partnerships and execute the ginormous project. So maybe what we were best off doing was taking a look at where our mission statements and where our strategic plans committed us already as individual organizations, and to find out where the opportunities for collaboration might lie in the places where we were all already putting some resources, whether time or money, and to start to get to work in that sort of way. So that led to collaboration on presentations to standing committees, that led to joint board meetings, that led to a joint arts day on Parliament Hill, or at least a performing arts day on Parliament Hill, that kind of thing. Just because of the constraint of resources, the opportunities for collaboration have tended to be, what are we already doing that we could do a whole lot better? I live for the day when we can actually break new ground and head off in directions that we can't today predict. But until that point, let's just do a heck of a lot better job at the things that we're already doing, whether it's back office services that we use in order to do the work that we're doing, or the kind of member-facing, public-facing work that really helps the arts raise their game.
We actually have embedded in our strategic plan that we want to be the partner of choice, obviously around that which we do, business and entrepreneurial skills, training, research, etc. So it's a little bit of stick to your knitting, we do what we do. When I came to arts and culture, I think historically art service organizations have tended on occasion to be very territorial, in part because there's limited resources out there. And I decided we would not be. We were in a field where people were doing a lot of good training and should be doing a lot of good training. So that's good. We 6 people are never ever going to cover the entire waterfront in Ontario. We would look for opportunities where we could augment, enhance, or offer something that somebody couldn't do on their own. So we kind of put it out there. We're here. We want a partner. If we can be useful to you, if we can do any of those things to do what you're doing better or where you're not being able to do something you want to do, then that's an opportunity for us to collaborate. When I talk about things like community champions, we're working with somebody in Thunder Bay. They know their community, they know what they need. How can we make it better, bigger, whatever, but not duplicate, not be redundant? That's the focal point that we bring and the sort of filter that we use when we're collaborating. And I think it's working. We are approached more and more often to partner because people, I think, go through the same process. They say, well, we're really about this. We don't really do, maybe WorkInCulture could do something there. And I think it means that collectively the sector can do more because we are working collaboratively.
So Katherine touched a little bit on the lack of research for arts organizations. MassCulture is working with Ryerson through SSHRC on mapping arts service organizations across Canada to assess common areas of need and gaps in cultural research with the goal to identify best practices and challenges. So why do you think that research is important, and what are common gaps that you've identified through your work as an executive director in your arts service organization?
I don't believe that we have collectively identified where the gaps lie. I think that we are due for a rich, round conversation around research, what we're individually doing, sort of what the asset map looks like, and where the gaps lie. I have to say, for my members in particular, the research that we've done and that I think needs to be done better and more extensively and repeatedly over time to track changes has an awful lot to do with changes in the communities that they're serving. That if we can help connect them to current useful news they can use about the evolution of their communities, the evolution of consumer taste, the evolution of consumption patterns, and where people are listening, when they're listening, what they're listening to and for. I have many questions, and I'd love to be able to connect our members to answers.
I think that for us, what we're finding more and more is that when we're applying for grants to help with our program and our project funding, there's an ask for evidence-based data. We want to do something and perhaps it's unique and innovative, but the funders are already saying, well, show us a study that proves that this already needs to be done, that this needs to be done with this particular segment of the population or with this art practice. And so I think that research is important from our end because we need to leverage that so that we can actually apply for funding. That being said, we have also partnered with Ryerson in just completing a 3-year study working with grade 8 students in underserved communities. That data will be released in September, soon. Yeah, very soon. It's been a really interesting and important process for us because now we'll have something that we can actually take forward and say, the work that we do is relevant. I mean, you already know the work you do is relevant. You have the qualitative, but it's the quantitative that everyone wants. And that ties also into evaluation. So I think there needs to be research, there needs to be more fulsome evaluation. And then where does it live? How do I share? Once I have this study, I mean, I can upload it into Trillium's knowledge library, but where else can it live? So that's a question I think we need to ask ourselves when we're doing this research, and we want to make it available to all levels within the arts sector, that someone could utilize it. Where can it live?
MassCulture, that's one of the gaps that they're actually trying to fill, is if there's a more coordinated strategic approach to research in general, which is not to say that they will do it all. So for example, WorkInCulture's big Making It Work project, which is really about jobs, the composition of the sector, skills training, all of that. Obviously, we do research filtered through our mandate, as everybody does, because for exactly the reasons, Susan, that you're talking about, you want to prove that what you're doing is working or that there's a need for what you're doing. I don't know if this is a gap, but one of the challenges is keeping the data fresh. So we've just concluded, a major labor market insights project. We worked our buns off to do a really substantive survey. We got over 1,100 responses, which is almost unheard of in our sector because everybody's over-surveyed and the like. You can't do that every year. Finding innovative ways to keep research refreshed, to keep it current, to keep people engaged in sharing their insights. But there are lots and lots of areas of gaps. Really, what's working? Collaborations, are they working? Funding activities. Camden Council, as Katherine mentioned, huge digital fund. How is that over time? Does it work? Does it move us forward? What does move us forward? Keeping our pulse on the real evaluation is what we're doing working. Where can we do more of it better? What does it cost? What's the return on the investment? All of those things.
I want to throw something in here that's a bit contrarian. We need some controversy in this podcast. There are times when I'm watching some program going through its efforts, and I think think, gosh, isn't this interesting? The hoops that we will jump through in order to access the resources that I'm speaking broadly in terms of the arts sector, that we need in order to ensure that artists can continue to make their work. And the twisting of vocabulary, the development of metrics, all the things that we talk about, and it's really so that artists can create, artists can recreate, artists can follow their bliss, and in certain settings, take us with them as they reveal to us what it is to be human and the gifts that they bring. There are times when I get cranky, I think is probably the best term, with the continual need to keep repackaging the same essential truth, which is about storytellers, musicians, creators, people who see the world in a way that is special and that are working in media that can be shared. This is awfully complex, the tests that we're putting all of this work to, when really it's just about protecting the ability of artists to create and to bring their stories forward in whatever medium they're working in.
I agree with you 100%. We seem to always have to repackage ourselves, but how can we change that as a sector? How can we work together to make that different? Very good food for thought, because we are first and foremost, even as art administrators, we're storytellers. That's what we do. We weave the story. We make things important and impactful because we've been witness to the change. But sometimes from a funding perspective, they want to be able to have a metrics that they can, and a box that they can check off.
And I love words. I love stretching myself to express things in different ways to different people, to attempt to convey the point. And there are few things I love as much as taking somebody to a performance who hasn't been to one before or not for a while, and having an opportunity to talk with them about what they've seen and heard and how that made them feel. And that's just the best. But as I say, there are times when I think the contortions we've made a fetish of contortions, and it would be fun just to check ourselves from time to time and say, gosh, what does this say about the power of the arts, and how do we liberate that power and make it available to more people?
I don't think that's controversial at all. You've established that you all use research in different ways for your organizations, but from your individual perspectives, what kind of research would be useful for you and your organizations going forward?
Susan talked about it, which is we all use research to underpin our funding applications. I think fundamentally, depending on your mandate and your audience and who you're serving, is what do they need and how do you provide? Research has to be rooted in answering some question people are asking and want to know the answer to, so that it is useful at the end of the day. And so it's delivered and packaged in such a way that it answers all of the quantitative, but it also has some of that qualitative that Catherine's talking about, to make sure that the magic of what the sector does is never lost.
This is an idea that I'm currently pitching to a few different funders, and it's inspired by a couple of things that I have read. First of all is a major report on resilience in the arts that was commissioned by Arts Council England. So I read this and I was thinking about it. This is seriously interesting stuff. One of the concepts that I thought was rather beautifully presented in this report on resilience was the idea of, let's say a horrible thing happens, markets crash in 2008. Do we want to bounce back to the state we were in prior to the market crash? Or might it be more exciting and more pertinent for us to be aiming to bounce forward? I read that report. I then read some research that had been done by the Canada Council for the Arts using, I think, 9 years of data from Canadian orchestras that was submitted as part of their grant applications using the CADAC data set. And one of the things that we discovered is that although Canadian orchestras' audiences are growing, and although they are generating more and more revenue from private sector and earned sources, and their overall positions are improving, they are still significantly undercapitalized compared to a number of their peers in the performing arts field, whether that's galleries, dance companies, theaters. And I'm looking at this, and I'm also filtering this through some conversations that we've been having lately about Canadian orchestras, that the perception that Canadian orchestras are not very daring. They're not terribly innovative. Well, guess what? If you're worried about payroll in 2 weeks' time, it may very well be that you're not going to bet the farm on a really innovative digital strategy that might cost you a pile of money up front, and that the long-term impacts won't be felt for quite a while. So this whole idea of innovation, resilience, and financial position is one that I'm quite intrigued by. I'm putting together a research proposal that will somehow put these facts together in a bag, shake them up, and see what we can derive in terms of practices that arts organizations can use that will help them be more resilient, more creative, more innovative, while also understanding that they still need to meet payroll in 2 weeks' time. I've thrown something together. It may be too big an idea and frankly too poorly thought through to be convincing, but I have to feel that there's something there in terms of bringing together emergent managerial strategies with good, solid management practice, with good financial analysis to really understand where we're at and how we actually change the weather in the place where orchestras are currently sitting. That's my pitch for some thinking about a concept as nebulous as resilience, but using existing research and ongoing dialogue to try to come to some shared understandings and some better sharings of the kind of management that we're going to need, not necessarily the kind of management that we have needed historically.
I think that that's really valuable, not just for Orchestra Canada, but I think for the arts sector as a whole. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is, because I've been with the organization for now close to 20 years, is that I hold the organizational history. And so when you talk about succession planning and call it human capital or resilience or building the next generation of leaders, a lot of us have been in these positions for a long time. So how are we incorporating or sharing or mentoring the next generation? And so in some ways that research would be incredibly helpful in moving forward, because there's so much in our heads. There's just so much there that you want to pass on. You want to take all the information that you have experienced. And I guess the other thing I think about it, just because I did it one way doesn't mean I'm always open for change. I think that's really important. And I think that's why Lakeshore Arts has grown. I don't stay rooted in what happened before. Because we did it before doesn't mean we can't try it again. We can always try something and do something new. But I think succession planning, especially in our sector, is something that should be really looked at, because there are quite a number of us that are within the next probably 5 to 10 years going to be transitioning out.
I agree that there's some interesting conversations to be had about the extent to which the things we know are shackles for the people who take over, and the extent to which they're a handrail and a departure point. And I try to address this through humor and humility and admiration for younger colleagues. And I know that I fail quite regularly. And it's just interesting thinking about transition. We are all working for very small organizations. And I think that that may be the toughest part of all, is thinking about how do we build succession, or how do we build intergenerational information transmission into small organizations as well as larger ones. One of the other things I discovered through the Canada Council research was that the number of full-time workers for Canadian symphony orchestras had gone down significantly. And in their place, what was happening was people were being brought in on a consulting basis, a part-time basis, a whatever. So the kinds of opportunities that I had as a really objectionable young person to spend a lot of time watching what my colleagues were doing at the same time as I was doing my own job are not necessarily afforded to people in this era of portfolio careers. And that sort of generous opportunity that so many of my mentors offered to me to let me watch them for a while and ask a heck of a lot of questions isn't necessarily built into the economics of arts organizations as they currently exist. And I'm still trying to sort through how we build in. It's not slack time. This is absolutely not time that's wasted, but it is just an opportunity for informal conversation, ongoing dialogue, questions, comments, smart remarks, possibly even some yelling from time to time, as we teach one another how to do our jobs better and how to keep this great work going.
My last question, again, I want to thank you all for taking the time out of your schedule to do this interview with me today. It's been very informative for me as well. Just building on what we were talking about, bouncing forward and succession planning and the next generation. So what advice would you give to emerging arts administrators that want to work in art service organizations?
I think this both is a reflection of my own career trajectory and what I do at WorkInCulture and what I do as a consultant, but arm yourself with business and entrepreneurial skills. People often ask me, what exactly do you do as an ED? And I know all the high-minded stuff about drive strategy and see the big picture. It's really about the money, number one. If you don't have the money, if you can't raise the money, if you don't know where the money comes from, if you can't manage the money, then you're not going to have the resources to do anything of a strategic nature. Learning those things and understanding that that is a part of the job at a senior level. I think too, all the stuff that Katherine and Susan alluded to, the magic and the passion part of it, you have to really be interested in this sector, I think. Otherwise, you're not going to enjoy what you're doing. And I think it's fundamental for the long term that you do that. And I think engaging beyond what you do, we all get in our own little targeted areas, and you could spend every moment of every day at your desk filling out grant applications. And I'm not advising that. I think you have to be interested in and understand the broader sector, and beyond that, the audience, because we don't just live in an arts and culture bubble, we live in a community, and understanding what our communities want, what they experience, what makes their bells chime. I think it's the broader engagement as well as the find the money.
I was going to say, If I was going to give advice, I would say build your community. I think it's important that you don't work in a silo, that you find your peers, like-minded individuals that you can share goals and dreams and challenges and frustration. I mean, I don't know about the two of you, Diane and Catherine, but we don't have HR. So, when you have any kind of situations, that are challenging and that are your responsibility, you need to have that lifeline. You need to know that there are other people out there that have the resources that you can build on. And the next thing I would say, hire really, really great staff, because I think that is essential to Lakeshore Arts and to my success. A number of individuals that I've worked with I always think they're smarter than me, and I'm really, really fortunate. And I think, Catherine, you said humbling a number of times in this conversation, and I have to say, yes, I'm often humbled by their passion and their dedication, their innovation, and especially when you think that this is not the highest paying sector that they could have possibly joined. So I think that's really, really important. And for them to understand that there's an ebb and flow of the work always. There will be transitional periods, there'll be great successes, and there will be some spectacular fails. And that's okay. I think it's really important because together we learn how to navigate through that period. There is magic. We believe in the arts. We've seen it. We've witnessed this. It's like, I can't imagine it not being in my life, but I think that you're right. There are some real basic business strengths that you need, budgeting, financing, all those things. But still, the reason that we're here is because, we've witnessed the magic. We know it works.
All marvelous. I'm going to throw in a couple of other things. My first piece of advice to somebody who's considering taking on a role in an art service organization is do it. You will learn amazing things. And even if you're not there for a super long period of time, even if this is just one step in a professional ladder that might see a person playing a range of roles in the cultural community, it's an extraordinary learning opportunity. I remember many years ago when I was first working at OC, talking with Jerry Smith, who was then the head of the arts management program at Humber, and Jerry's feeling at that point was that the first term placement for the arts management students at Humber, he liked it when they were at art service organizations because of the overview of the sector that the organizations provided, and the fact that because they were small organizations, an observant Humber intern could really get a handle on a range of kinds of things going on within the organization in a way that a larger organization wouldn't necessarily afford. I'd also throw in a couple of other observations. It can be really useful for someone who's starting their career to try to get a sense of whether they are fundamentally a small organization leader or a large organization leader. And by that, I mean, in a small organization, the joys come from the fact that you've got your hands on almost every aspect of every single project. And even if you have the luxury of doing some delegating, you're probably still somewhat involved because of person power issues. Larger organizations, it tends to be a little bit more around setting a really engaging direction, hiring awesome people, and ensuring that your door is open when they want to come talk to you and raise questions. But that the actual sweating through every detail, that belongs to your directors and other staff within the organization. Final thing I'll throw in there is the importance of working really closely with your board of directors. And this is something that it took me a while to learn as someone working in the cultural sector, that any time that I spent working on governance and working with my board was time that paid off massively in the mid to long term. It did not help in the short term in terms of the multiple fires that were ablaze on my desk, but that if I could tear myself away from the crisis of the minute and be thinking a little longer term with board members, that was time that was incredibly well placed and time that invested there paid off enormously. I have a wonderful board at Orchestras Canada. I've almost always had a wonderful board at Orchestras Canada. And anytime that I am not blessed with a wonderful board, it's because I dropped the ball at some point earlier and just failed to engage appropriately. As I say, if you have the luxury of spending time with the board, working on really important work together, that is incredibly valuable time to spend.
Those were all my questions today. Again, thank you all for taking the time. I learned a lot through this interview.
To find out more about Diane, Catherine, Susan, and Glodeane, as well as the SSHRC-funded research Mass Culture is doing with Ryerson University, check out massculture.ca. While you're there, join the growing MC network as a way of staying connected to cultural research.